Hey everyone, the latest flagship from OnePlus has finally arrived, and to no one's surprise, it's called the OnePlus 6T. The Chinese enthusiast brand has been less about killing flagships in recent years, and more about constructing a high-end phone for a slightly less high-end price. Their T versions in particular have always been about refinement rather than an overhaul, so I can also tell you that if you have a OnePlus 6, there's really no good reason to get this device. Instead, this phone is more about those who want a cheaper alternative to the iPhone XS or the Pixel 3. But can this phone really compete with the season's flagships? Or should you walk the more well-worn path this time around? I'm Angie for GSM Marina, and this is our OnePlus 6T review. My first impression of the 6T is that Oppo and Vivo had a baby. This is unsurprising considering they share a parent company. However, it is interesting to see what innovations have been put on the phone and what innovations have been left out. Coming straight from the Oppo's design language is the elegant droplet notch at the top of the display that replaces the previous boxier notch. It's impressive because it holds an RGB sensor, a distance sensor, and the front-facing camera. There's also a sliver of an earpiece at its top. Sadly, there was no space for an LED light, so now you have to do without it. There's still an option to hide the notch, but unlike before, if you don't, it crops into videos when you full screen them. It's a small notch, and it's really not too intrusive, but it should really be up to the user to decide whether it cuts into content or not. Our Midnight Black version has a smooth matte back that uses the OnePlus's unique anti-glare coating. It's the same material as on the 6 and it smudges easily. You might initially mistake it for metal, but it's actually made of a material OnePlus is calling 3D glass. Still, there's no wireless charging. The 6T feels really comfortable to hold, and like in previous years, the buttons are nice and clicky. Conveniently for right-handed users, the alert slider is also on the right, but it's still a bit stiff. There are also new animations that pop up telling you what mode you just selected. The phone feels durable and well made, and the screen uses Gorilla Glass 6. Again, there's no IP rating, though it looks like a few drops won't harm it. Considering how many of their fans have been clamoring for an IP rating, it is curious as to why OnePlus has omitted it once again. Maybe it'll drive up the cost of the phone too much, but honestly that's just my speculation. What they have included is a new in-display fingerprint reader. My impressions of it are mixed. First, you might have to input your fingerprint more than once. When I redid mine, the speed went from almost unusably slow to decently quick. Second, while the sensor is relatively fast and reliable, it doesn't compare to the instant unlock that the conventional fingerprint reader before was capable of. Instead, you now have a choice of 3 pretty animations that distract you from the slight slowdown and the occasional misread. Though part of the sensor's appeal is to unlock your phone more easily when it's on a desk, more importantly, it's bleeding-edge tech. This UD fingerprint reader is the fastest one we've seen on a phone yet, and it's even faster than the one on the Huawei Mate 20 Pro. With future iterations, we'll likely see an even faster sensor and a much larger sensor area, so this is only the beginning. For now, if you really need a near-instant way to unlock your phone and are willing to sacrifice a little bit of security, I recommend the Face Unlock option. Now, it's not just that the smaller notch frees up some real estate. The 6.4-inch display is actually slightly bigger than before. The Optic AMOLED panel has a Full HD resolution like the previous model. In our tests, it's super color accurate in either the DCI-P3 or sRGB color space, depending on the color profile you choose in settings. You can turn on night mode or reading mode using the toggles and tweak them in settings, but you won't be able to use both simultaneously. You can also turn on adaptive brightness, which works reasonably well. As a whole, the panel gets plenty bright, though it's not class-leading. In any case, it's a really nice display. The 6T has a single bottom-firing speaker. In a year where so many flagships have finally embraced the revelation of stereo speakers, we really hoped that OnePlus would join in. The speaker gets louder than before, especially with higher-pitched sounds, where there's a bit of distortion. It generally sounds good though. Unfortunately, and somewhat infuriatingly, OnePlus has joined the ranks of companies removing the headphone jack. Sure, you can live without it, but that's not the point. It's very hypocritical to mock Apple for so many years, and then remove it, especially when you've asked your users and only some of them are okay with it not being there. When you do use the provided dongle, audio quality is identical to the OnePlus 6 in terms of clarity, but it's slightly quieter than before. However you end up listening to music, you have either 128GB or 256 to store your songs. There's no microSD card slot, but it's still plenty of space for many people. The 6T has the same Snapdragon 845 chipset as the 6, and in benchmarks the phones are more or less identical. In the real world, it's also like the 6. In other words, smooth, fast, and responsive. The OnePlus 6 has Oxygen OS with Android Pie on top. Fans of light Android will appreciate how clean it is, but rest assured it still includes traditional OnePlus elements, like the shelf and the gaming mode, which now has been updated to allow floating notifications and other customizations while gaming. There's also a beta feature called Smart Boost. It stores data from games in RAM, and it should improve app startup times. Like before, you can choose a custom accent color for the system, and it's especially noticeable in the notification shade. There's one area I can easily say Oxygen OS beats stock Android, and it's in terms of navigation options. It has navigation buttons, the pixel navigation with the pill, or gestures. Gestures free up the most space and are generally quite intuitive. The gesture for the task switcher in particular is also more fluid than on the 6 and feels closer to the one on the iPhone. It's also easier to activate split screen mode. With future updates, OnePlus should include the ability to long press the power button to activate the Google Assistant. The 60 scored a 90-hour endurance rating in our battery life tests, which is a lot more than the 76 hours of the OnePlus 6. The phone also takes advantage of dash charging, which allows the phone to charge 55% in 30 minutes. OnePlus has a dual camera setup that has one main sensor and a secondary one that helps with some stuff, I guess. It's still one of the weirdest dual camera setups out there. The secondary camera has the same focal length as the main one, and covering it with a finger doesn't appear to change the image quality, leading us to question its existence to begin with. In daylight, images have awesome colors and a stellar dynamic range. This is thanks to the image stacking the camera employs. The level of detail is pretty good too, just not the best. Despite the 16-megapixel main camera having the same sensor as before, OnePlus promises image improvements thanks to better scene recognition. Is that true? Well, some of the time. Here during sunrise, the 6T presents a dreamier scene. At noon, on the other hand, shots didn't differ all that much. Shots of people in particular are supposed to be much improved, but we found practically no difference between the 6 and the 6T. Blur in portrait mode is convincing, though you'll have to take portraits by standing very close to your subject thanks to the 25mm equivalent lens. There's now a new night mode in the camera app. It does pseudo-long exposures, but results are nothing like what we've seen with the Huawei P20 or the Xiaomi Mi Mix 3. The benefits are subtle, and the camera shake is a huge issue. It ruined most of our attempts until we switched to a tripod. The phone, however, would detect the tripod and switch to longer exposure shooting, still in pseudo mode, producing sharper and better exposed night shots. Without the night shot mode, low-light photos are okay too. Color saturation and bright lights are well preserved thanks to the always-on image stacking HDR, but the level of detail is not flagship grade. Like photos, video quality hasn't changed much from the OnePlus 6. Videos are nice and detailed with wide dynamic range and good color reproduction. However, 4K videos at 30 frames per second are automatically stabilized. This means that they are both cropped and less sharp than videos shot at 60 frames per second. Though the stabilization is quite good when walking, you can't switch it off and you have to convert your 60 FPS videos to 30 FPS if you want crispier footage. In Full HD, dynamic range and colors are also excellent, but once again, you'll get sharper footage if you shoot at 60 frames per second. The 16-megapixel front camera has a lens with a 25mm focal length. Selfies are generally nicely detailed, but if the HDR mode kicks in, the image becomes a lot softer. Dark areas are often rendered straight black, which can be quite noticeable on those with dark hair. Portrait mode works well here too, but you'll find the same halos as on the 6. So that's pretty much everything we were able to test in the week we had with the 6T. Sure, it's not way better than the OnePlus 6, but it is the OnePlus phone to buy, especially as supplies of old OnePlus phones tend to dry up as OnePlus releases new devices. More importantly, this phone is not less than or almost a flagship. With the high-quality construction, the butter-smooth gestures, and the light UI, it's easily on par or better than other flagships in terms of daily use. This time around, it even shares the traitorous lack of a headphone jack. OnePlus also does some things better than the competition. It actually has a cutting-edge under-display fingerprint reader, which still feels slow but is the fastest and most reliable one we've seen. Battery life is better, and even the notch is smaller, which is especially nice in comparison to the Pixel 3's helicopter pad of a notch. It's basically missing an IP rating and some more advancements in the camera department, but if you can live with that, I definitely recommend it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below, and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get our latest tech reviews as soon as they're out. See you next time.